Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of the foXnoMad podcast. I'm your host, foXnoMad Alopola. My guest today is Ignacio Gallego-Marcos. He is the founder of Turbli, which is a site that shows you what the expected turbulence is going to be across your flight. So it will show you a graph of, when the turbulence might be high and low. He has been working in the area of computational fluid dynamics for the past decade, more than a decade actually, and we talk about turbulence, what causes it, how Turbli takes the information, where it gets the information from to give you these graphs, and what you can do about your fear of flying, how turbulence affects planes. This is a fascinating conversation. I think you're going to enjoy this one. So here we go. Thank you, Ignacio, for being on the podcast. Like I mentioned before we hit record, I came across your site because I was researching another episode. It was like I was researching another episode, and there was data that was taken from your site, from Turbli. And I said, oh, wait a minute, this is really interesting. It should be its own story. And then I was like, wait a minute, let me talk to the guy who created this site because it's really interesting. I didn't know this data was available or accessible. So maybe you could introduce yourself and introduce the site a little bit.
Yeah. Thank you for having me here, Anil. My name is Ignacio, and I'm the founder of Turbli, turbli.com. And Turbli is actually an idea that had been in the back of my mind for many years, kind of ever since I moved to Sweden, which was 12 years ago. Because when that happened, I started traveling a bit more often between Sweden and Spain. And in one of those flights, I thought it would be interesting to see how it's going to be, how is it going to be the turbulence, or what's it going to be the wind, and etc. And I mean, nowadays everything is invented. So I took out the phone and I checked for like turbulent forecast for today Europe, and I was surprised that that service was not available. And then in that moment, I remember thinking that this would be a great idea to do at some point, and that was 12 years ago. And that had to do a little bit because my background is in fluid mechanics. So I'm an engineer, and then I did my PhD in the area of computational fluid dynamics, which analyzes, of course, wind and turbulence and etc. But then it was not until 2019 when I started actually working on the idea of the site and developing it. And then in 2020, it was finally released, Turbli.com. And since then, it has been quite a few updates. So the site that is today, it's kind of very different from what it was initially. It was more simplified, and it's continuously improving. And the plan is to. I mean, I have not run out of ideas to continue adding new features and new possibilities that will make it better for the users. And it's important to say as well that it's a tool for the passengers. So the main idea is that passengers, as you just said, realize that that information is available to them. It's no longer a secret that only the pilot knows, and you're on the plane, and you can't have an idea of what is going to happen. You actually can, and that's what Turbli is providing.
And for people who haven't been to the site yet, right? You enter in your departure city and your destination. It finds the flights for you. It finds, the flights that are going to fly today or tomorrow. And you put that in and you can see a graph of the turbulence expected, over the course of the flight, which is fascinating. I did not know pilots had access to this information as well before. I mean, I knew when you were in the air, I figured they did, but I didn't know they could have it before. So how is that information compiled?
Mm. So turbulent forecasting it works in a very similar way as global weather forecasting. So when you check your phone and you see tomorrow is going to rain, turbulence forecasting goes in a similar way. What it does, it post-processes global weather forecasts, and it looks for areas where there is significant velocity differences, basically. Velocity, temperature, but mainly differences, because those differences that, for example, imagine a layer of high speed air meeting a layer of lower air is going to create a lot of instabilities and therefore turbulence. So by having many different correlations, mainly based on gradients of temperature and velocity, we can estimate turbulence up to 2 days ahead. And pilots use this information to design their flight plans in combination also with pilot reports, meaning that other aircraft that have passed recently for a certain area, they say, oh, be careful because there is probably moderate or severe turbulence. And if many pilots see the same indications, then they can even create what is called SIGMETs, significant meteorological reports, that are kind of given at the same time as the forecast to the pilots. So they have both of that information at hand, forecasting and pilot reports. And in the site, people is shown the expected forecast, but also the pilot can, of course, make any decision during the flight, right? They can choose, oh, now we're going to decrease altitude, or we're going to go higher, or we're not going to follow exactly the waypoints that were listed on our flight plan. So to account for that, we give sort of a probabilistic area. So there's a thick line, which is the most likely route that you're going to take. And then there's a shaded area on the graphs that shows, but these other turbulent levels are also possible if your pilot deviates slightly from the route.
And is this data, is it it's publicly available? Where does where do you pull the information from?
So the data comes from government weather agencies, NOAA in the United States, and the Met Office in the UK. So Turbli, what it is a data aggregator. It aggregates not only from these, but from other sources, weather data, airport data, flight path data, flight tracking data, to put everything together in a very simple, but at the same time complete view of how your flight is going to be. So we've been talking that there is information about turbulence, but I also present information about wind, for example. And you might have heard, if you go in many flights, that, oh, we're going to be a bit late because we have a lot of headwind, more than usual. So Turbli also calculates how much headwind or tailwind you're going to have compared to the average, and tell you, okay, there's more chances or less that you arrive delayed. It also shows if you will have thunderstorms on the way, which of course the pilots is not something that they're going to go through. Large thunderstorm clouds are quite dangerous. So pilots, they even keep a safety distance from the thunderstorm cloud of about 20 nautical miles, if I remember correctly. And then it shows you as well how likely is that your landing and your takeoff are going to be bumpy or not so bumpy. And that's mainly related to the crosswind component, not to the turbulence value more. So the wind that is flowing perpendicularly to the direction of the runway.
And when we think of turbulence, when I think of wind, I always wonder, and maybe this is a stupid question, how strong are those winds? Like if the wind that makes noticeable turbulence on a plane, what speed of wind are we talking about? Would I notice that on the ground, or is it because the plane is moving so fast, or is it the combination of the two?
Yeah, it's a combination. So the higher you go up in the atmosphere, the stronger the wind gets. So in the jet stream level, for example, this narrow and high velocity airflow that goes circulating around the Earth, you can reach velocities of 200 kilometers per hour, which might seem like a hurricane level, and how can the plane go through there? But at the same time, the air density is lower there. So the effect that such airflow has on the plane is a bit lower than if it's the full air density here at ground level, 200 kilometers per hour. So it's not the same effect. But of course, the faster the plane goes, the stronger the perception for the passenger inside the cabin. So the analogy is, if you go with a car over a road bump, if you go slowly, you just feel a slight up and down. Whereas if you go very fast, you feel what you might consider as turbulence also on a plane, like a sudden boom, shaking of the car. So speed does have an effect as well.
And
And another important factor for planes is the way they are designed. So normally, there's a misconception that the bigger the plane, the better, right? Because it weighs more, so it'll be more difficult for turbulence to shake it around. And that's actually partially correct, but not entirely correct. The important factor is so-called the wing loading, meaning the weight of the plane divided by the wing surface area, because that tells you how much area is exposed from the plane to the wind. So how much area it can affect it and move it around. So if you would imagine all the weight is concentrated in a small sort of ball, it would be very difficult to move. But if it's spread out in a very big plane, like the wings, it will be easier to move for the same weight. And normally bigger planes have higher wing loading, and that's why they do better turbulence than smaller planes would do.
It's because they have sort of a larger wing to body
Higher
ratio.
wing. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So for the mass that they have smaller wings
Ah,
compared to a plane that is small, that is lower in mass. It needs bigger wings, and that's basically it has to do with the lift force that is proportional to the velocity of the plane. So then bigger planes tend to be faster, so they need less wing area, whereas slower planes they need a bit more larger area.
interesting. Intuitively, you would think the opposite, right? You would think bigger plane, bigger wing surface
Yes.
area.
Yeah, but it's related to the velocity. So birds, for example, have a very low wing loading. They go very slow, so the proportion of mass of the bird to the size of the wings is very large. And butterflies are in the other extreme. They don't weigh anything, but they have gigantic wings compared to their weight because their velocity is very small. So you can say butterfly, bird, light plane, and heavy plane.
Interesting.
And of course, a butterfly is very affected by turbulence.
Yeah. I've never seen one ever fly in a straight line ever.
Yeah, yeah.
So, did you create the site? Are you a nervous flyer? Is this why, or was it more of the interest in the physics?
It was more the curiosity and the interest into physics. So as I mentioned, my background is in fluid mechanics, and I'm working on it as of today as well. So it was driven by curiosity and by the hope that other people will also find it interesting and they were like, oh, I want to check what are the conditions during my flight. I'm not scared of flying, but inevitably many people that are fearful flyers are using my site. So for some fearful flyers, Turbli is very helpful because it gives them the expectations. So what they can think that, okay, it's going to be in the range of light to moderate. So they can be prepared for the flight. They know that it's not going to go to the severe level, but they know that it's not completely smooth either. So that knowledge gives them calmness. But for some others, I've seen that it also creates unnecessary stress. Like you see that it's going to be moderate turbulence. And then people with phobia of flying have a very hard time. I mean, with this. So it's very important to understand it, and especially for me. So if it creates unnecessary anxiety, just don't look it up. I mean, I'm not able to control who will use it, who will not use it. Many people, I've got many good feedback of people telling me, thank you for this site. It has enabled me to fly calmer. I'm able to set the expectations right. But I also see other group of people that has a harder time with it. Like they, by seeing it, it creates additional stress, and that has been difficult to balance. And all the improvements actually of Turley are done in to better be able to quantify what's the likelihood of hitting this or that turbulence, so that it minimizes the risk of overestimating it or underestimating it. So my drive for improving the quality of the site is actually for the fearful flyers to give less false alarms or give less wrong predictions. You know what I mean?
So, yeah, I mean, when you see that graph and then you see a spike into like strong turbulence, what are those categories? Light, moderate, severe? I mean, are they defined by the wind speed or
Yeah. So turbulence is measured in so-called the EDR, so eddy dissipation rate, which, to give an explanation, is that a turbulence is like a vortex, like a spinning vortex. But at the end, that vortex breaks down into smaller vortices that eventually just slow down and dissipate and stop. So the speed at which they stop is the eddy dissipation rate. And how many of them are stopping gives you an idea of how many are being generated at the same time. So that's the higher the dissipation rate, the higher the turbulence, because yeah, you're generating more. And within that range is normalized from 0 to 1 or 0 to 100 if you multiply. You have the null turbulence, which means there's no turbulence at all. And that's a term that I actually try to avoid because all the atmosphere is almost all the atmosphere is turbulent. I mean, even here when we speak, when we are when we are moving our hands, or the air around us is also turbulence. So the opposite of turbulence is laminar flow, and that's very unusual in the atmosphere. And of course, the plane is so strong that when you have light turbulence, you will barely notice it, and that's why they call it okay. But then let's call it that there's no turbulence whatsoever. But I think it's important for people to understand that turbulence is very common, and especially for fearful flyers, they understand that it's such a normal phenomenon. Even it's happening in rooms around you when you run, when you cycle. Then you don't need to be scared. It's nothing particularly scary for aviation. It's something that is completely around us, and engineers know about it because it's so common. And of course, they design the plane to take it into to take it into account. So you have null, which you will not see in my graphs, and you have light, which is the vast majority of the atmosphere, like up to 90 something percent. And in that case, you will not feel much. You can still walk. You can still, there might still be, how do you call it, flight attendants delivering food and so on. Moderate turbulence, you might start having difficulties in walking on the food services. And then this moderate severe, where you will for sure have the seatbelt sign turned on, and you will start feeling strains against your seatbelt. And then it comes the severe turbulence. And there, it's really important that you keep your seatbelt fastened, because the changes in altitude might basically lift you. And danger is that one hits the head against the ceiling of the plane, and then you damage your neck, you damage your back, etc. But as long as you have your seatbelt on, all those problems kind of are all those risks are no longer there. So very simple measure, fastening the seatbelt. And then you have extreme turbulence, which is extremely rare, like the name it says. And that one can be found can usually be found in the inside of thunderstorm clouds. So that's why pilots never go through a big thunderstorm cloud. You have there upwards of high airflows going up, and then the hail and the rain going down. And as I mentioned initially, turbulence is created by velocity differences, right? So you can imagine this updraft and downdraft meeting each other with all the hail and all the rain. It's the perfect recipe for an extreme turbulence scenario. So pilots, as I mentioned, never enter them, and they even keep a safety distance. But even in that case, planes are actually built to withstand those forces, because there's a lot of regulation on this. Actually, it's not just Airbus can choose. They actually need to fulfill certain criteria, and they need to fulfill the accelerations of severe turbulence plus a safety buffer of 50%. So whatever they get from the loads that are likely to happen in severe turbulence, they need to multiply the safety factor by 1.5. And it makes it really robust and extremely unlikely that anything happens to structural integrity on the plane during turbulence.
And I think for a lot of people, this sounds silly, but I fly a lot, so like you hear the food cart moving, as you hear the glasses moving, it sounds that those sounds are also very jarring for people. I think maybe the plane might not actually be shaking that much in a lot of circumstances.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so I was gonna say, like, how much is the plane moving side to side and up and down? Like, when we feel those drops, are we talking a meter? Are we talking 10? Some people will say, "Oh, we dropped 10 meters," but what is the movement?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I think that the best that a passenger with that has fear of flying can do when it comes to turbulence is to take a glass of water or a cup that the flight attendants can give you, and put it on your tray table. And you will see that during light turbulence, the water is barely moving. And that can be a feeling like, okay, even though I'm hearing the clinking of the glasses that you're mentioning, I mean, there's nothing happening to this glass. So in moderate turbulence, even, you will see that the movement is quite limited. Moderate to severe, perhaps start shaking a bit more. And in severe turbulence, the rule of thumb is that if the cup is still on the tray table, it's not severe turbulence, and if it's not, then it's severe turbulence. But I think it's a very useful exercise, because 99% of the time you will see, or even higher, that the water remains on the cap, doesn't even get spilled on the tray table. So how to judge quickly the level of intensity, you can do that exercise. Another thing that I think worries passengers is when they see the wings bending a lot and they feel like that might be a problem because the wing might break or it might snap off. I've heard it also many times. But it's also important to remember that the wing is deliberately made to be flexible, actually. That flexibility is like the springs on a car, like the suspension on a car. It's actually absorbing part of the energy from the turbulence, and it's allowing you to have a better sensation inside the cabin. So it's made for that purpose. And as I mentioned before, it's also able to take the loads of the severe turbulence and the continuous cycling of turbulence. Fatigue testing, this is the stress that materials have when pushed up and down through really long times, is also thoroughly analyzing the design of a plane. I mean, they are tested for more than twice their lifetime before a plane model is released.
And is it true that that I have heard, just traveling, that turbulence cannot take a plane down? A lot of people are worried, and some of the advice that you'll read was like, "There's no amount of turbulence that could crash a plane," which I'm assuming that means there's no reasonable level of turbulence, or is it? I mean, what are we?
Yeah, I would say it's almost entirely correct. One thing that I want to stress though is that I also read a lot, turbulence is not dangerous. Turbulence is not a concern. And that is almost true. Turbulence is not a concern, but it's not a concern because it's one of the most analyzed and researched like parts of aviation. It's not a concern because of how well the planes are built to handle it, basically. So an improperly made plane would be will have a problem with turbulence. But the planes that are designed from Airbus, Embraer, ATR, Boeing, etc., they have to go through so much regulation that then turbulence does not pose any safety concern. And your question of is there any level of turbulence that can have a safety? Well, at some point, severe turbulence, I mean, it's perfectly fine. The pilot will try its best to get out of there as soon as possible, but it's mainly because of the passenger injuries that he would want to avoid. He knows that some people will not be wearing the safety belt, and that's of course a very dangerous situation. But when it comes to the integrity of the plane, there's no that risk. Extreme turbulence still can be handled by the plane, but again, this is a range. It's not just one value of extreme turbulence. If we go to the high levels inside a thunderstorm cloud, they could potentially be dangerous for a plane. But we are talking about the highest possible turbulence that can be generated in the atmosphere.
And so when a pilot is flying, let's say they get a radio from the pilot ahead, they say, "Oh, there's a lot of turbulence."
Yeah.
Does the pilot then, let's say you're over at the Pacific Ocean, do they radio to somebody to change the altitude? How do they decide what to do, where to go?
Yeah, exactly. So it depends on the situation. For example, if the pilot just receives a message from a pilot in front that, hey, there's turbulence ahead, what he would do is communicate with air traffic control and say, I would like to change altitude to 2,000 feet higher or lower. And then traffic control, their job is to ensure that there's separation between planes, will reply, yes, you can do it. Or no, actually, you cannot do it, but you can do something instead. And then they come to an agreement and they will change route. But if the pilot suddenly encounters severe turbulence, he does not have to notify air traffic control straight away. He can make the decision unilaterally because he's the one in control, he's the one that decides for the plane. He can put the plane to safety first, go to a location where all the passengers are now fine. So when I say safety, I mean passenger safety, and then communicate to ATC, air traffic control. I did this because there was severe turbulence, and now I'm at this location. And then they come to another agreement. But that said as well, since turbulence is not a safety concern for the integrity of the plane, there are also many times that pilots don't change the course, especially, for example, if the turbulence band is very big. I mean, there's no way sometimes. It's just too large, covering too many altitudes. or if the deviation would require arriving 20 minutes late, maybe they know that some passengers will prefer arriving on time, and also they will need to pay for more fuel consumption. So there are many parameters at play. It's not that 100% of the time they will avoid turbulence. They will, of course, try to ensure that the ride is as comfortable as possible for the passengers. But sometimes turbulence is just inevitable, and since it's not a safety issue, then they can go through it as well.
And so when you're compiling or the data for Turbli, are there trends that surprised you? Are there things that you noticed in the data that you weren't expecting? Maybe places that were more turbulent than expected or
Yeah,
less?
we do the rankings now every year of the most turbulent routes and the most turbulent airports, and that was very interesting. I have to say, this last year, I mean, the hotspots tend to be places with high jet stream activity. This high velocity airflow going around the Earth, and then places with mountains, especially large mountain ranges like the Andes or the Himalayas. And this is because when the wind goes above them, it again creates a lot of changes in the velocity because it's very chaotic, the motion there, and that leads to a lot of turbulence. So usual hotspots of turbulence are, as I mentioned, Santiago de Chile, for example, and any other route that it connects to either Argentina or other countries in South America. And then in the Himalaya and the Tibetan Plateau. So many Chinese routes appear, from Nepal as well to China appear high. And another one that stands out quite often is Japan, and that's mainly due to jet stream activity. And what happens there is that there's a lot of cold air coming from Russia, down from Russia. And then there's the Pacific current going upwards, kind of clockwise towards Japan. So that big temperature difference, cold from Russia meeting the warmer front from the Pacific, creates a stronger jet stream, and a jet stream that is actually not very, but particularly stable. Normally it's meandering a lot, like giving a lot of bends, but in Japan it's particularly strong. And that makes it run quite high, like routes from Tokyo to Osaka are known for also being very turbulent. And in the US, the area of the Rockies, and then in the East Coast, you have a similar behavior as in Japan. You have the cold front from Canada, and then the front of hot air from the Gulf Stream in this case. And that creates also a strong jet stream, not as strong as the Japanese, I would say, but strong jet stream in the East Coast that generates turbulence.
And I have also read that turbulence is increasing, the
Yeah,
occurrence and severity. Is this true, or is it just
yeah.
being
I mean,
reported?
yeah. So Turbulent, the Turbli was founded 3 years ago, and all the data gathering and so on has been 3 years, and 3 years is not enough at all to make an assessment of a long-term trend. It's just not enough data. So, but I've been reading research done in this direction, and that research focuses on evaluating past data from reanalysis data. What it's called is basically simulations that are done to predict how were the conditions back in the future, and they assume that they make the right prediction when it matches the little measurements that were available at that time. So let's say in the 1980s you had these 200 points of measurements or more, of course. And then the simulation that matches those measurements, it's assumed to be the conditions for that day. And that is done for the past 40 years. So you have the era 40, era 50 now, and you can derive insights from that. And they see actually that the shear in the jet stream is increasing. So that points to higher turbulence already happening from the past 40 years. And then when it comes to the future, then they assume different climate change scenarios, and they tend to assume the most extreme, the relative forcing, I think 8.5. So it's an unlikely scenario, but it's okay to assume it. I mean, you want to see if a parameter is going to have an effect. You assume the worst case, and if it doesn't, then you stop working there. But then they saw that it has an effect. So if we go for the worst case climate change scenario, then we see, similar to what they saw in the past, an increase in the vertical shear of the jet stream. How much exactly is going to increase, like percentage-wise, where? That's very difficult to tell. Some papers say actually it's going to be this region. Some others says it's going to be another region. And the quote of a specific percentage of 55, 100% is not useful. I mean, of course, it has to be shown what the research has produced, but we as the public shouldn't receive it as a truth. Like in the North Atlantic is going to see a 73% increase of turbulence by 2050. No. But it is based on the research, it does seem that it's going to be on the rise.
So, and not good news, I guess, for fearful flyers, but good news that right that like we've said that the planes are designed to handle much more extreme turbulence than typically you would encounter on any given flight.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I mean, and that's an statement I can say, and maybe say, oh, but I don't believe it. But the fact is that the accidents caused by turbulence are, I mean, almost non-existent. We've seen aviation accidents recently. Unfortunately, there were quite a few, but they were not attributed to turbulence. They were to other factors. So turbulence alone is extremely unlikely to cause any major accident to the plane. The Singapore Airlines was a very unfortunate event that happened last year. And then there, one person did die of a heart attack, and it was very, very bad example and very unfortunate. But we should remember that it's very rare. It hadn't happened for, I mean, I think it was 20 years that there was not a fatality directly attributed to turbulence. And in the past 20 years, there have been millions and millions of flights.
And as you said, right, keep your seatbelt on when you're in the chair.
Exactly.
Um,
I mean, as long as you have your seatbelt fastened, there's almost nothing that can happen to you, because the integrity of the plane again is not a problem, given all the design that has been put behind it, and also very importantly, all the maintenance that is done behind the plane. So it's not only the initial design, but planes are maintained regularly. I mean, they have go a little bit into detail, but they have several layers of maintenance schedules. They have the quick schedules that they would do almost once a week. Then they have the monthly schedules, the type B that they call them. Then C, the schedules, and the heaviest one happens every sort of 8 to 10 years. And there, basically, the entire plane is disassembled. And when I mean disassembled, it's like they take out the engines, the seats, they take out the cabin, the electronics in the cabin of the pilot. Everything is taken out, inspected, changed if needed, upgraded also. That's where you get the upgrades of seats, and the plane that was looking old has a fresher look. And everything is analyzed very, very thoroughly. And it takes months for those planes to go back into service. But they need to do it because there's regulations specifying that you have to do it once the plane reaches a certain age. So if you're a fearful flyer and your next flight you are entering and it's a very old plane, it gives a feeling like, the seats are old, you have to be sure that it went through all the required maintenance checks in order to be there. So there's no safety concern. There's just a concern that it will be less comfy for you, but nothing on the safety side.
And is there a limitation to the data that you wish, like a blind spot, you're like, I wish I could get this, or something that you can't predict very well that you wish you could predict better or working on?
Yeah, nowadays the challenge, not only for Turbli, of course, but for turbulence prediction is so-called convective turbulence. So weather patterns that are large, like jet streams, for example, or mountain-related patterns are kind of easy to predict because they have a large scale. So the global weather forecast with a resolution of about 13 kilometers can capture them quite accurately, actually. But when it comes to convective turbulence, I mean clouds, for example, that they have a scale of 100 meters, or thunderstorms, or all these things are very difficult to predict, even when it comes to basic weather, when it's going to rain, etc., for global weather forecast. It can be improved if you go regional. So there are many regional forecasts, like the United States that has the rapid reference forecast, in the Met Office also has here. But for a global aviation, that's not possible because you cannot go down in resolution to 1 kilometer. It will be too computationally expensive. So if I would want something in the future, is added computational capacity to be able to resolve or permit the convection of the clouds in the model, and therefore get a better estimate of the near cloud turbulence and the turbulent inside cloud. To get a very good prediction on that, you would need to go down in the order of 100 meters resolution. And that's, I mean, not, I mean, by no means feasible today. We are using resolutions of 13 kilometers. Think about reducing it orders of magnitude to 100 meters. So I think that's the pain point right now of weather forecasting in general and turbulent forecasting, the convective turbulence, the one done by clouds and thunderstorm clouds.
Interesting. Yeah, as you were talking, I was thinking the times that I experience turbulence the most, right? It's going over mountains. You almost always feel turbulence. Typically, I maybe I'm wrong, but over land to water, if you're going,
Mhm.
an ocean line or a large lake maybe or something like that. And then, yeah, when you're going into certain clouds, right? And then the plane starts shaking, and you're like, great. Like, yeah,
Yeah,
interesting.
exactly. Exactly. That's very hard to predict. And there, the pilots rely on. Good thing is that when it comes to thunderstorm clouds, for example, they are always visible. So that's something the pilots can rely on. And they also have the onboard radar. It's many people don't know, but the nose of the plane actually, there is a radar inside there. So it's constantly scanning whatever is in front of the plane, and if it's it's sending an electromagnetic beam, and if it hits a droplet, it will return it, and then the pilots have a complete map of the weather right in front of them. Even if they don't have a turbulent forecast for it, they can see it directly by their system, and by combining it with satellite data and ground radar, they can have a quite good picture of the convective activity that might be missing these forecasts.
So it's an ongoing field, right? I think
It's
a
an
lot of
ongoing
people
field.
think, yeah, like we've figured it out, turbulence. No, not at all. In terms
Yeah,
of
and also the set of equations that govern fluid mechanics, the Navier-Stokes equations, they're one of the millennium problems. They have not yet been resolved analytically. So there's no proven solution for them. We can tackle this problem by doing computational fluid dynamics, by locally resolving it in small cells, etc. But turbulence remains one of biggest unresolved problems in physics as well. There's no universal turbulence model. There's no model that can tell you accurately in this computational fluid dynamic framework what exactly is going to be the turbulence level. There are many types. K epsilon, K omega models. They're all different. They are all tuned for specific applications, but there's no universal law there. And that is actively being researched in, many universities in all fluid mechanics departments.
and is it, I guess a silly last question, is it all math or are there like planes that go up for research purposes where maybe they have extra sensors? Yeah, obviously it's math is the base, I would
Yeah.
assume. But are there these kind of like research planes that are sent or
Uh, So the field of fluid mechanics relies, of course, on math, but heavily as well on experimental data. So it goes hand in hand. You can't have just the math, and that goes for small scale lab experiments that you would do, wind tunnels, turbulence that you trigger in specific setting to validate your model, and also in the large scale that you are mentioning. Now, there are actually, yes, planes that NOAA has, the famous hurricane hunters, the ones that whenever it's hurricane season, they fly to the middle of the hurricane eye and they gather data on pressure, velocities, with the goal of improving the models behind the forecasts. That's nothing again about computational power. It's about better understanding how these very chaotic systems behave and hoping to get a universal close statistical correlation that can tell you where is turbulence more likely to happen in given a set of wind and pressure conditions. So it's a very active field, yes.
I guess for people who are, nervous about turbulence, you have to then think about there are planes that are flying into hurricanes on purpose, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah, that's a good.
so it seems like a good high bar
Yeah, yeah,
to be
yeah.
able to.
And they are not gigantic planes. They are not the Airbus 380s. They are relatively small, but of course very well prepared. But as well prepared as the commercial airliners are.
And just wrapping things up, is there a feature or something you have planned for Turbli coming up? Or are there some new features that you'd like to share that have just been
Yeah,
released?
actually, there's one thing I've been working on for the past months, and that's directly related to fearful flyers. So fearful flyers use my site quite often, as I mentioned, and I really want to help them out. I do not want at all that somebody checks Turbli and feels stressed. And what I'm doing right now is actually writing a book together with a psychiatrist to help them overcome their fear of flying. And we will see yet. It's almost finalized, but we will see yet when it's released. But it will give basically a set of guidelines and information as well for fearful flyers on how to overcome it. And I think it's going to be quite effective. It's short, it's to the point, it's with a detailed step-by-step plan that people has to follow, and with the hope that people use Turbli not really to of course not to add additional stress, but more as a curiosity. Like, oh, I want to know how are the chances that I hit turbulence, or if we're gonna have a catering service or not, etc., etc. But not something that it's gonna keep you scared.
That's great. Well, hopefully we can have you back on when the book is released.
Yeah.
Uh, and in the meantime, people can check out Turbli and find out how bumpy their next flight may or may not be. Um, my barrier for is it severe turbulence is if I hear somebody scream, there's always like one, where there's a drop and I hear a lady just like in the background. I'm like, okay, this is severe
Yeah,
or
yeah.
not.
Now you can just take a cup of water instead, but yeah, the shouting might also be.
Yeah. It's funny, for me for turbulence is the more scared everybody else is, the more
Mhm.
calm I get. And then the opposite happens. When it's really bouncy and everybody's really calm, then I start to I don't know what it is.
Okay, but then
So
you're a fearful flyer. You're scared of turbulence to some degree, or
no, not really. I think not really.
it's just additional.
Occasionally, yeah.
Yeah.
A flight attendant told me once, it depends on the time of day you fly. So if you're a morning person, like I am, that's when you're most alert. That's when it might affect you more than at night when you're sleepy. So I said, okay,
Mhm.
interesting. So
We should all choose our daytime to or time of the day to fly.
or yeah, I'll check Turbly too to see what I'll be curious to see the prediction for my next flight. Just to see
Yeah.
how it goes. But thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate this. It's a fascinating topic. I think everybody who flies wants to know more about turbulence. They want to know, why does it happen? Is everybody not scared of it? There's always people say, "Are you not scared?" And a lot of people I think are very nervous about,
Mhm.
turbulence
Yeah, yeah.
when
I
it
mean,
hits.
it's I'm not a fear flyer, but I do feel slight anxiety as well when we hit the moderate high path of turbulence. I think it's inevitable. We tend to be scared of things that, in a sense, are a bit dangerous, like fear of heights. Of course, we are
Mhm.
not made to be high up on a tower, and the fear of flying kind of makes sense. We are not made to be on this metallic box at 30,000 feet, flying almost at the speed of sound. So it's understandable that we have this reaction. There's nothing particularly strange about it.
And all the data shows that. I mean, when you go into Turbly and you just put in different flights, you'll see like almost all of them have these graphs.
Yeah,
Every
yeah.
flight
It's
has
something.
turbulence, like you said, some amount.
Pilots are extremely used to it. Engineers that design the plane know that sooner or later that plane will hit severe turbulence, so they need to design for it. It's a design requirement, and they add the safety buffer of 50%. So there's no safety concern there anymore after that.
Well, again, thanks again for your time. Where can everybody find you? Turbly, the
Yeah,
site?
turbli.com, turbli.com. And then if you would like to contact me for any questions or any concerns that you might have when you see your forecast, please drop me a line to the email that is listed there.
Cool. Well, thank you again so much for your time. Thank you everybody for listening. And yeah, we'll leave links in the show notes where everybody can find the site and check out the forecast for their next flight. Thank you, Ignacio, for being on the podcast, and thank all of you for listening. Make sure that you give this episode a 5-star rating and a couple of nice words about the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons. I'll have new videos for you every week, and I'll see you in the next episode.